Hello, welcome to another session in our teaching series, Hidden Facts in Biology. In this video, we are going to be talking about nervous coordination, and under this, we'll look at the nervous system, its parts, and we are going to be talking more about the central nervous system. First of all, by way of introduction, I would love to say that in complex animals, different organ systems which are specialized for a particular function are present. And this is for the purpose of effective functioning of the body. And for effective functioning of the body, this organ system must work together as a team. This is what we mean by the process of coordination. Coordination then can be defined as the process in which one or more tissues or organs interact and complement the function of each other in order to maintain homeostasis of the body. To bring about coordination, two communication systems work together hand in hand. These communication systems are the hormonal systems, which involves the endocrine glands, and the nervous system. These two communication system has a link. The hypothalamus of the brain forms the important link between these two systems. Now we are going to be looking at the nervous system. The nervous system of a mammal consists of the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. It is divided into two parts, and these are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. We are going to be taking a look at the first part, which is the central nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain, which is situated or enclosed in the cranium. The cranium is also known as the brain boss, and the spinal cord, which runs down the center of the vertebrae column, which is known as backbone. Now let's talk about the brain. The mammalian brain is divided into three main parts, and these are the forebrain. The forebrain consists of the olfactory lobes, the cerebrum, the thalamus, and hypothalamus. We have the midbrain, which separates the forebrain from the hindbrains. And then we have the hindbrains. The hindbrain consists of three parts, namely the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, and the pons varoli. The midbrain, actually, which separates the forebrain and the hindbrain, contains the optic lobes. So now I'll be showing you a diagram to show the dorsal view of the brain of rabbit and the dorsal view of the human brain. So this is a diagram showing the dorsal view of the brain of the rabbit and the dorsal view of the human brain. For the dorsal view of the brain of the rabbit, the first structure labeled there is the olfactory lobes. The olfactory lobes is concerned with smell. Then we can see the cerebral hemispheres. Hemispheres simply means that it is divided into two portions. So that is the cerebrum with each of the hemispheres. The function of the cerebrum is that it is the seat of voluntary actions, and it's also the seat of our memory, consciousness, our intelligence, and our learning. Then we see the next structure there, which is the midbrain. The midbrain contains the optic lobes, which are responsible for vision or sight. So you see the optic lobe there, which is present in the midbrain. Then we have the cerebellar hemispheres. It indicates the cerebellum. The cerebellum is responsible for positioning and movement. So we have the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is actually responsible for involuntary actions like our breathing, our heartbeats. So those involuntary actions that we cannot control are controlled by the medulla oblongata. So we also have the pineal body there. The pineal body is actually secrete melatonin, and it's also responsible for maintaining of our sleeping and waking up, what is known as the circadian rhythm. That's what the pineal body controls. So that is all about the dorsal view of the brain of the rabbit. For the dorsal view of the human brain, the same parts we just mentioned there are also present. The cerebral hemisphere is there. I will mention that the cerebrum is responsible for voluntary actions. It's the seat of voluntary action, the seat of consciousness, intelligence, memory, learning. And then we also have the cerebellum, which we say is responsible for positioning and movement. And we can see the fissures that separate the hemispheres. That is, the cerebrum is separated by a fissure into the cerebral hemispheres. So now we also take another diagram that shows another view of the human brain. That is the vertical view or the vertical section of the human brain. So this shows the vertical section of the human brain. We have already spoken about some parts of the brain in the previous diagram we looked at. Also in this diagram, there are some other parts that are there. The both diagram shows the vertical section of the brain. We have spoken about the midbrain, where we made mention of the fact that it connects the forebrain to the hiddenbrain. So that's the midbrain there. The midbrain is also known as the mesencephalon. That is what you can see in the other diagram there, the mesencephalon. So that is the midbrain. So we have already spoken about the cerebellum, the cerebrum. Also, we have spoken about the medulla oblongata, and they are all labeled here. So the other labels we can say are just different parts of the brain. So having taken a note of these views, now we are going to be discussing the different portion of the brain individually. The first portion we'll take is the forebrain. The forebrain is also called the proencephalon or the prosencephalon. It consists of the cerebrum, the olfactory lobes, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. We'll take each of them and we'll speak on them. First portion, which is the cerebrum. The cerebrum is actually the largest part of the brain. The cerebrum is divided by a deep furrow, which is known as the median fissure, into two halves. And these two halves are called the cerebral hemispheres. There's a band of fibers called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects and protects these two halves. The outer surface of the cerebrum is known as the cerebral cortex. It can also be called the gray matter. This outer surface is folded in irregular pattern or convolution to increase its surface area, while the inner part of the cerebral cortex is known as the white matter, as it contains nerve fibers that appear white in color. The outer part of the cerebrum is known as gray matter because it consists of gray cell bodies of neurons. This is something to take note. What are the functions of the cerebrum? They are as follows. Number one, it controls all voluntary actions, and these actions include movements of parts of the body and ability to speak. Another function of the cerebrum is that it is a seat of consciousness, intelligence, memory, judgment, learning, and imagination. The cerebrum is also responsible for the collection of information from sense organs and storage of such information for later use. We take a look at another structure in the forebrain, and that is the olfactory lobe. The olfactory lobe are a pair of small structures located anteriorly on the cerebrum. That is, they are in front of the cerebrum. They receive sensory impulses of smell from the olfactory organ and make the animal conscious of the odor in its environment. So the olfactory lobe is closely related to the function of smell. The next structure we look at in the forebrain is the thalamus. The thalamus are two oval structures that you can see above the midbrain. They are located above the midbrain and they contain some mass of gray matter. What is the function of the thalamus? The function of the thalamus is that it is the center of sensation of pain, touch, taste, and anger. And as we said before, it contains many gray matter. Another function of the thalamus is that the thalamus also directs sensory impulses from the lower parts of the brain and spinal cord to the approximate parts of the cerebrum. The thalamus acts as an important relay center by relaying motor impulses from the cerebrum to the spinal cord. The next structure we'll take a look at is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is found just below the thalamus. It is connected to the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus contains reflex centers, and these reflex centers are linked or connected to the autonomic nervous system. What is the function of the hypothalamus? The hypothalamus, number one, regulates the body temperature. It also regulates water balance. It regulates sleep, and it also regulates blood pressure. Next function is that the hypothalamus is the control center for appetite. That is, it controls how we eat and our desire for food. The hypothalamus also controls speech. It is also the center or the seat of aggression and anger. The hypothalamus also controls hormone secretion from the pituitary gland. So we have looked at the forebrain and the structures contained in it. Now we are going to be looking at the connection between the forebrain to the hindbrain, and that is the midbrain. The midbrain is also called the mesencephalon. It is a short region that connects the forebrain to the hindbrain, and this midbrain or mesencephalon consists of the optic lobes, and these optic lobes are responsible for vision or sight. The midbrain also controls some reflexes that are concerned with detection of sound. That is, it plays a role in hearing. Now we'll take a look at the hindbrain. The hindbrain is also called the rhombencephalon. It consists of the following structures: the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, and the pons varoli. We take each of them. First, look at the cerebellum. The cerebellum is sometimes called the small brain. It consists of two hemispheres. The surface is covered with gray matter, that is the outer surface, while the inner side is composed of white matter. The cerebellum is connected to the semicircular canals of the ear, and it receives impulses from it through vestibular nerve fibers. It also controls some reflexes concerned with detection of sound. That is, it plays a role also in hearing. What is the function of the cerebellum? The function of the cerebellum include the following. Number one, it is responsible in the controls of the actions of muscles in voluntary response, such as in walking, in talking, and sitting. And that is why damage to the cerebellum might cause jerky, uncoordinated movements. The cerebellum also controls and coordinates body posture or balance. We'll take a look now at the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata connects the cerebellum to the spinal cord. It is the posterior portion of the brain that is located at the back that continues into the spinal cord. And unlike the cerebrum and cerebellum that have an outer region of gray matter and an inner region of white matter, the medulla oblongata has an outer region of white matter and an inner region of gray matter. Of note, and an important fact is that it is in this medulla oblongata that the right and left motor fibers from the brain cross over each other, and the significance of this is such that the left hemisphere controls the right side and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. What is the function of the medulla oblongata? The medulla oblongata has the following function. Number one, it controls respiration, heartbeat, dilation, and contraction of artery. When we talk about dilation and control of artery, we are talking about the regulation of blood pressure. The medulla oblongata controls or regulates blood pressure. Another function of the medulla oblongata is that it controls digestive movements and movements of intestine, that is peristaltic action. It also controls the secretion of many glands, e.g., that is, for example, the secretion of saliva. Another function of the medulla oblongata is that it is involved in involuntary actions, that is, actions we are not in control of, such as laughing, coughing, yawning, and blinking of eyes, are also controlled by the medulla oblongata. Another structure we are going to be looking at is the pons varoli. The two halves of the cerebellum and the cerebrum, that is the hemispheres of the cerebellum and the cerebrum, are connected to the medulla oblongata by a thick bundle of nerve fiber, and this thick bundle of nerve fiber is known as the pons varoli. What is the function of the pons varoli? It carries impulse from one hemisphere of the cerebellum to the other, thereby coordinating muscular movements in the two sides of the body. Having a look at the brain and its different parts, the next structure we are going to be talking about, or the next part of the central nervous system we'll be looking at, is the spinal cord. The spinal cord consists of thousands of neurons, and these thousands of neurons are clustered or arranged to form a cylinder of the nervous tissue. The spinal cord is actually the continuation
of the brain. It occupies a canal known as the neural canal of the vertebral column. It is protected by the bones of the vertebral column but passes through this neural canal. The spinal cord is protected by 3 layers of meninges, and these are the dura mater, which is the outer layer, the arachnoid mater, which is the middle layer, and the pia mater, which is the inner layer. A narrow canal, which is the spinal canal, runs down the center of the cord, and this narrow canal is filled with a fluid known as the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. We'll be taking a diagram of the spinal cord. This shows the transverse section of the spinal cord. The diagram we have shows the transverse section of the spinal cord, and this diagram shows that the spinal cord consists of the following parts. The central canal, the first one we can see there. The central canal is a hole in the center of the spinal cord, and it contains the cerebrospinal fluid, or the CSF. We can see the dorsal side of the spinal cord where we can see the dorsal root. The function of the dorsal root is that it has a sensory function, in that it receives sensory impulses from the body. While the next structure we see there is the gray matter. The gray matter is H-shaped, like we can see, and it is the inner part of the spinal cord. It contains intermediate neurons and cell body of motor neurons. Of note is that the gray matter is divided into anterior and posterior horn. The next structure we see there is the white matter, which is the outer portion of the spinal cord. It contains the axon of sensory and motor neurons. The next structure we see there is the ventral root. The ventral root is motor function. It has a motor function. That is, it transmits motor impulses from the spinal cord to the muscles of the body. Then we can see the covering membrane that covers the spinal cord, and then we can see a label there that shows the ventral side of the spinal cord. There's a membrane, although the membrane is not labeled in this diagram, which is known as the pia mater. This pia mater is a membrane that surrounds the spinal cord and contains blood vessels. Other outer membranes that you can see are the arachnoid mater and the dura mater. The pia mater, arachnoid, and dura mater are also called the layers of meninges, and they protect the spinal cord. This spinal nerve, before attaching to the spinal cord, is going to divide into a dorsal root and ventral root. The dorsal root contains sensory neurons, and before it enters the spinal cord, it forms a ganglion containing cell bodies of sensory neurons. The dorsal root carries impulses or messages from the body to the spinal cord, like I have mentioned before, while the ventral root contains motor neurons and carries impulses away from the spinal cord to the body. So that is all about the diagram we can see here. Now we'll talk about the functions of the spinal cord. What are the functions of the spinal cord? Number one, the spinal cord sends impulses or messages to the brain and carries responses from the brain to the muscles. Another function of the spinal cord is that it is the seat of reflex or involuntary actions. With this, we have come to the end of our teaching in this video. Now we are going to be looking at some questions to further enhance our understanding of what have been discussed. Our first example says coordination and regulation of body activities in mammals are achieved by the A. Nerves only, B. Hormones only, C. Nerves and muscles, D. Nerves and hormones. The answer to this question is D. Coordination and regulation of body activities in mammals are actually achieved by the nerves and the hormones. The next example says coordination is achieved in the body of mammal through the action of the A. Endocrine and nervous system, B. Skeletal and nervous system, C. Muscular and nervous system, D. Circulatory and nervous system, E. Skeletal, muscular and nervous system. The answer to this question is A. Coordination is achieved in the body of mammals through the action of the endocrine and nervous system. The endocrine system is actually talking about the hormones. To our next question, it says the part of the mammalian brain responsible for maintaining balance is the A. Medulla oblongata, B. Olfactory lobe, C. Cerebellum, D. Cerebrum, E. Frontal lobe. The answer to this question is C. This is because the cerebellum is the part of the brain that is responsible for maintenance of balance or body posture. To our next question, It says if an animal is very active and has a good muscular control, it is likely to have well developed A. olfactory lobes, B. cerebral hemispheres, C. optic lobes, D. cerebellum, E. spinal cord. The answer to this question is D. This is because the cerebellum is responsible for the control of voluntary muscle action. So an active animal with a good muscular control is likely to have a well developed cerebellum. Our next question, it says the part of the brain that controls heartbeat and breathing is the A. olfactory lobe, B. cerebellum, C. cerebral hemisphere, D. medulla oblongata. The answer is D. The medulla oblongata is the part of the brain that controls heartbeat and breathing. So our next question, it says the function of the spinal cord is to A. stand the body structure erect, B. control voluntary actions, C. transmit impulses to the brain, D. regulates developmental changes. The answer to this question is C. The function of the spinal cord is to transmit impulses to the brain. For our next question, it says the region that controls most of the unconsciously process of a mammalian body is the A. cerebellum, B. cerebrum, C. spinal cord, D. medulla oblongata. The answer to this question is C. The spinal cord is the region that controls most of the unconscious process of the mammalian body. This brings us to the end of our examples. Now we are going to be taking some exercises. These exercises were taken from our book, Hidden Facts in Biology. The answers are also present in it. You can get a copy, either the hard copy or the soft copy. Thank you for listening.